Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe and welcome to my July wrap up. July was a very good month for me in terms of reading. I really came back from my sort of, not reading slump, I had a reading slump like a while ago, and then I just after that was reading less books than I usually do. And now I think I've definitely got back into the flow of reading a lot of books. Because I haven't actually had school work to do, that's given me more time to read. I have been revising for an exam, but I've already tried to sit this exam before. I'm now resitting it. So I guess I kind of like have experience already doing the exam. So I've already like revised quite a bit for the exam. And then just anything that I'm doing now is kind of like supplementary. So I have had more time to read and that's made me very happy. Reading always makes me very happy. So I'm just, yeah, I'm glad that I've been reading more than I did in the past. I think I read 13 books this month. I have not counted and I don't think I'm going to, but I think last time I checked it was like around 13 books. I basically have 3 books that I read physically and all the other books that I read were as ebooks because I've been reading a lot of ebooks recently because I can't afford to just keep on buying physical books. So ebooks it is. We're gonna start off with the physical books and I'm like not gonna necessarily do these in order. I'm just gonna say that I read these books and we're gonna talk about them. So this was actually the first book that I read this month. I was reading this at the end of June and I brought it into July and I finished it in the first couple of days. I finished it in the first couple of days of July. Normal People by Sally Rooney. Probably heard of this before. It's a very, very popular, famous, loved, well-known book. This was a reread for me. I read this, I believe, last year around about the same time as I read this year. And the first time around, I wasn't quite in the depths of BookTube as I am now. I didn't really have a personal connection to the book to want to really love it, if that makes any sense, which sounds a bit stupid, but I do think that when you go into a book wanting to love it for the sake of someone that you know, like a friend or something who really loves the book, that you therefore want to love it more. I don't know if that made any sense. The first time around I was like, yeah, it's a good book, it was alright. I think I gave it like 4 stars and I enjoyed reading it. It was a quick read, but I didn't see, I guess, like the more literary values in it, and I think I've also grown as a reader to appreciate more literary stuff, if that makes any sense, especially because I've read more literary fiction since then. That being said, I think that Normal People is 100% like a character-driven book. Like, there is not really much plot going on. As the title would suggest, this is very much about normal people. I am not going to say too much about this. I ended up giving it 5 stars the second time around, and that was like off the bat of finishing it. And when I then sort of think back on it, I don't really know if it is a 5 stars or if it's more like a 4.5 stars. I just don't feel a personal connection to this book. I think that it's great, but I don't feel like a special connection, which some people do, and it kind of saddens me because I love having those connections with books. But I do definitely want to read more Sally Rooney. Like, I think she is absolutely amazing at writing characters, and I tabbed this and I like did some highlighting and stuff like that because there were definitely some things that I thought were very interesting. I think that this is the kind of book where if you just read it without thinking too much, you just think, oh, like it's a very plotless book. There doesn't seem to be very like many interesting things in it, and then if you sort of look a bit deeper, there are some very interesting things that are being said, and not really much else to say about that one. Another book that I read physically was Peter Pan. I read this very, very wonderful edition. This has got, I believe, the original illustrations in it. This was very fun. I gave it 4 stars. I actually need to give the movie a rewatch soon because, like, I really want to. There's not really much to say about Peter Pan just because it is so well known and such a well-loved story. When it comes to these kind of like children's books that have been made into films, like, I really want to read more of them. I really want to read The Wizard of Oz because I absolutely love the film The Wizard of Oz, and just like the whole, like, just it as a story. So I really want to read the book. But this, obviously, we basically all know the story of Peter Pan, right? I think that this feels a bit more darker than the Disney film, which tends to be the case when it comes to older stories that are made into Disney films. Disney is obviously made for kids, like in the more modern era, I guess, whereas this was for Victorian children. And I'm not gonna lie, Victorian children were were bloody terrorized when they were kids. Like, growing up in the Victorian era was probably the shittest thing ever. I mean, not the shittest thing ever, like there's other things that was, but like it was not a great time to grow up as a kid. So like I don't think the authors of books were necessarily like thinking, oh, this needs to be all nice and like lovely and stuff like that. So there's definitely darker undertones to this than there is to the movie. I think the character of Peter Pan is a little bit more, not sinister, he's just a little bit not as nice as the Peter Pan in the film. That's kind of all I have to say about it. But I did enjoy my time reading this, and I would definitely recommend it if you are a fan of the film. Like, having watched the film before and known the story before didn't take away from the enjoyment of reading it, but I don't tend to be the kind of person who gets put off if they've already watched the film. The third and final book that I read this month that was a physical book was The 100-Year-Old Man That Climbed Out the Window, Disappeared by Jonassen, and I found this in a charity shop. It was very cheap. I probably wouldn't have bought it if it was like regular price, because it's a book that I've heard a lot about, but I haven't necessarily been drawn to picking it up like ASAP. But I did pick it up this time around just to see what the fuss was about, and I didn't really enjoy it. I gave it 2 stars. I think it's more a case of the humour, the way it's written, that I didn't really enjoy. I think it is definitely a good book, it just wasn't a book for me. It's not because I'm a completely dead person and I don't want to like laugh or anything like that, but for some reason I just, like, humour in books, like actual comedic books, actual comedic books don't talk to me as well as like comedy films. Like, sometimes they do, but I just think that the whole idea of someone writing something with the purpose of trying to make you laugh just doesn't vibe with me. I like it when comedy is a bit more like, or like humour is a bit more off the bat. It feels a bit more fresh and sort of real. Whereas when it's like written, like purposely thought out and written into a book, it just doesn't really vibe with me. There was also a lot of stuff going on in this book. Like, there's 2 different storylines following the same guy, but just like earlier in his life and later in his life. And I don't think we needed both of them. Like, I can kind of see why it was done, but I also just feel like it was way too much. He's a bit of an odd character. He has like no opinions, which like at times was really great because it got him into situations that he could then get out of because he had no opinions, if that makes any sense. But also the fact that he like even got in these situations and got out alive just seemed a bit pathetic. Like, it seemed a bit weird, it seemed about stupid. I probably won't pick up anything else by this author unless the premise sounds really interesting. Let's talk about some of the books I read as ebooks. I'm just gonna start from the top. This is gonna be in order of like how I read these books. So the first ebook that I read, this feels like it was ages ago. Oh my god, but it was in July. It just felt like it was ages ago. So the first book that I read as an ebook was The Last Flight by Julie Clark. Just to sum it up quickly, I gave it 2.5 stars. It just fell flat. Like, it had potential to be really great, but it just wasn't for me. So this was another case of there being like 2 timelines or like 2 perspectives, and this time it is 2 different characters and it is 2 different perspectives, and I think that they were so closely aligned that it almost took away the mystery aspect of the book. Like, so this is a thriller, so you would expect there to be something where you're like, oh, what's going on, I want to get some information, but it felt like you're just getting everything. If you don't get information from the one storyline, you're going to get it from the other one. If the author had have just withheld one of those storylines, or even just had the storyline but like had it been more vague and we hadn't have got all the information, then we would have still been left wanting more, wondering like what's going on, and it would have added back that thrilling element, which for me just was missing. It just felt like I wasn't left wondering, oh, what's going on, I kind of already knew it. That's basically why I gave it 2.5 stars, and to be honest, it's a month since I read it and I've kind of just forgotten what happens. After that, I read Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. This is a kind of like a gothic horror. It isn't super scary, but there's definitely, you can see it's heavily inspired by the sort of classic gothic literature, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I really like gothic literature. I like the fact that it makes it scary based off of the atmosphere as opposed to being like blatantly gory or scary. Although I do like a bit of body horror, I do like a bit of gore, I also quite like atmosphere to play a massive role in books, because I think that it's one of the only things that can truly make you shiver down to the bone is atmosphere. I wouldn't say that it was making me shiver, but it was definitely very atmospheric. I really enjoyed it. I liked the setting. The main character, she was really cool. She was just like a boss ass bitch. In general, I just really enjoyed it. Like, I just found it to be a fun book. I don't think it was mind-blowing. It's not a favourite book of mine. That's why I gave it 4 stars, but it was definitely one of the better horror books that I have read. I'm going to move on. I'm trying to keep this short and snappy, otherwise I'm going to be sitting here for hours. The next book that I read was Amari and the Night Brothers, a lovely little middle grade by B.B. Alston. I really enjoyed this. This is the first book in a series. I think the second book is coming out very soon, and this was just very fun. People describe this kind of like Men in Black. That's how people kind of pitch it, but it's a middle grade, and it's essentially about this girl whose brother went missing, and then she finds out that he had something to do with this like Bureau of Supernatural Investigations. So she goes to try and get into the bureau, and she goes to this like summer camp that they run to try and get recruits. She goes there and she's like really enjoying her time, but she's also trying to figure out, you know, what's going on with her brother. So we've got that mystery aspect. We've got some very lovely friendships going on. We've got like some twists and turns which I didn't see coming, and I really enjoyed. Did I say I gave it 5 stars? I don't know if I did, but I gave it 5 stars. I'm very much looking forward to the second book, and I would 100% recommend it if you are on the lookout for more middle grade, especially if you like middle grade that isn't purely fantasy and has a bit more of like I guess an urban fantasy aspect, but also is a little bit more like a supernatural thing as opposed to just magic. And then I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This got me up to date on his older books. Obviously he's had one that's come out recently, but I wasn't counting that. I need to read that soon. But Home Before Dark I very much enjoyed. I gave it 5 stars again. It was fantastic. Like, it gave me everything that I wanted, exactly the same as all his other books. Really love Riley Sager's books. I just think he is fantastic at writing thrillers that are fun to read. And I think that sometimes people get caught up in the idea of a thriller has to be like, you know, constantly be like thrilling, like that's what it has to be. It has to be dark and thrilling, or like it has to be, you know, have loads of twists and stuff like this, which this book definitely had some twists and it was definitely thrilling. But I think the main thing about Riley Sager's books are the fact that they're fun, and that's the reason why I go back to them, because I know that when I read them I will have a good time and I will constantly be enjoying myself, and there probably won't be a single moment where I am bored because they're just very fun. After that I read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, and I gave that 4 stars. I very much enjoyed this, but once again it wasn't like a favourite. So 4 stars, but that's very good. I enjoyed this mainly for the characters, because we basically follow 4 senior citizens who have this Thursday Murder Club where they basically dig up old cases from like the 80s or something like that and talk about, so they're like cold cases, and then they try and figure out who the murderer was. It's like a very fun premise. It's exactly the kind of thing that I would do if I was an old person. I would definitely have a murder club. A murder club, that sounds like I would murder people. It was an enjoyable book. It wasn't perfect by any means, like it wasn't, I mean, no book's perfect, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the best book I've read in the world, but it was very enjoyable, and that's why I gave it 4 stars. As I said, the characters were superb. They all had their own personalities but played together so well, and one of the things that I really loved about it was you could tell that they were old people, but that didn't take away from their personalities. Like, you could have easily taken their personalities and put them into a young person and it would have worked in the same way. But having that sort of like, having them be old added a layer of humour to it, which I really enjoyed, because it was more like situational humour coming from the old people. And it also just like added a bit of depth, having some characters that weren't just your standard like young characters, because I think sometimes there are too many books with young characters and it's quite refreshing to read a book with older people in it. Let us carry on. Another book that I really loved, This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. I've already spoken about this a couple of times, so I'm not going to go too much into depth, but I gave this 5 stars. This is definitely a favourite of this year, if not of all time. It was just a very, very fun book, enjoyable premise, great characters. Like, all of the characters, more or less, were amazing. The main character in particular is just very fun. The magic in this was very interesting and is something that I haven't really read before. This is more like urban fantasy, which is definitely more my thing when it comes to fantasy. Like, I do enjoy fantasy, like, when it's in actual, like, not this world places, but I also really enjoy urban fantasy, so that was really fun to read. She has 2 mums and they were the best people ever. Like, they were the best parents I've ever read about ever. So, like, it gets 5 stars for the mums alone, I'm just saying. And there was mystery, there was intrigue, there was like family drama kind of thing. Or not family drama, but like family things going on. There was, you know, magic with the main character. There was this mysterious apothecary that she was trying to figure out what is going on with that. This big house that she inherits, and she's trying to figure out, like, how does that house connect to her magic? How does it connect to her family? Like, what went on in that house in the past? And there's just a lot of elements to it. There's also a bit of Greek mythology in there, so there's just so much to enjoy. And I think that the majority of people that read this will enjoy it because they'll find at least one aspect or 2 aspects that they really love. The next book I read was another thriller. It was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I've read 2 of her books in the past, and I think I gave both of them about 3 stars. I think they just weren't very memorable for me. And I think it was the kind of thing where, like, I definitely liked the premise, but it just didn't work for me, or I don't know what it was. I mean, at the time of reading those 2 books, I was honestly reading so many thrillers that I think that I couldn't appreciate thrillers, like, individually in a way, because they all felt like they were blurring together, and, like, I was too busy comparing them to other thrillers. I don't know what happened, but The Turn of the Key was definitely my favourite out of the 3 that I've read. I gave it 5 stars. I think that the premise isn't necessarily anything like mind-blowing or new. It's not like, you know, it's not like this new really inventive premise, because she's actually kind of taken it from The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which I really want to read at some point. But what she's done is she's taken this premise and she's modernized it, and she's added elements that have just, like, taken it from being a creepy premise to, like, being extra creepy. This is one of those thrillers that, like I said before, I really love atmosphere. This is a really atmospheric thriller. It is atmospheric both in the, like, the wider setting, because it's set in the Highlands in Scotland, and that in itself is quite a remote destination. You know, that adds kind of a layer of creepiness, and then on top of that, the actual house that this main character finds herself in is simultaneously old and modern, and there's, like, this really weird surreal, like, clash between the 2 that is actually described in the book. Like, there's moments where she steps from, like, the old into the modern, and it's just this really odd feeling of going from one to the other. Obviously, like, we all know the haunted house, or, like, the old Victorian style mansion is a really creepy setting by itself, and then on top of that we've got a really modern aspect that feels very almost like sterile, kind of like hostile, like not necessarily in a place that you'd want to be. There's a lot of surveillance going on. Like, there's this system called Happy that basically does all the surveillance, controls all the lights, controls the blinds, controls music, everything, and that in itself is a creepy aspect as well. So there was just so many elements that were added to an already really creepy premise that just made it fantastic. Chef's kiss. I loved it. A book that I didn't love so much, Neverworld Wake. Still trying to figure out how I actually felt about that. So all I'm going to say is I gave it 3 stars. It was a great premise. We're essentially following some characters that who were friends, and then something happened to them, and then they stopped being friends, and then they got together for, like, a reunion kind of thing, and then they ended up in a car crash and they narrowly escaped death. But they didn't actually, because then they get back to the house and an old man knocks on the door, and he basically says that they have to choose one of them to live and the rest of them will die. So it's like following them trying to figure out who is it that's going to survive. They have to vote unanimously, which is a problem because like they have a very strained relationship between all of them, and there's also added mystery elements and stuff like that. Another book where there's just so much going on that it's kind of like, did the author really know what was going on themselves, because there was so much. And it was kind of confusing to me, but it also just felt like with all these elements it should have been mind-blowing, but it wasn't. And I think there's such a fine line between, you know, taking a load of stuff and making it really, really great, and then like having too much and it just not working at all. Then I read You May Now Kill the Bride, which is the first book in the Return to Fear Street trilogy by R.L. Stine. I wanted to pick this up after after watching the Fear Street trilogy on Netflix. I really enjoyed it. Definitely had some negative thoughts about certain aspects of it, but I really enjoyed it. Sort of on the whole, like, it was just very fun, very sort of slashery, and exactly the kind of films that I enjoy watching. So I wanted to pick up one of those books. So I did. You May Now Kill the Bride. There's really not much to say about this. It is an R.L. Stine book, so it was a little bit cheesy. From reading reviews afterwards, I think that this one was maybe, it didn't have quite the same feeling as the original ones, because this is one of the books that was written in 2018, like later after the original ones were written. So I think that it probably isn't as fun as some of the other ones were. So I definitely want to get some of the older ones at some point. It was just very fun. It was very fun. I gave it 3 stars. And then I read The Taking of Jake Livingstone. Yes, The Taking of Jake Livingstone was actually the final book that I read. I gave this 3.5 stars. And I was hoping that it would be higher. Like, I was honestly hoping that I was going to enjoy this a lot more. I really liked the premise of it. I didn't really sort of look too much into what it was about. I just heard that like a lot of people were excited for this, and I really liked the cover. So I was just like, no, I definitely want to get into this and just see what happens. Because it was available as an ebook, and usually newer books aren't, so I just hopped in it and I got it. There were so many elements to it that could have made it such a great book, and I just don't think that it really worked for me. I think it could have definitely been, you know, a book that other people really enjoy. Like, I enjoyed it, I just didn't think it was amazing, and I'm being a bit more critical with this one just because it handles a lot of topics. There's a lot of trigger warnings. I don't think it was badly handled. I just think that there could have been an extra layer added to it just to make it just that much better. But this is really a case of it being not so much concrete things that I can sort of fault in it. It's more a feeling of when I was reading it, like feeling like it wasn't quite as great as it could be. I think it became a little bit too fantastical for me at times, whereas I feel like it could have, like, I personally would have preferred it if it was a bit more grounded, if like the things that were going on in the book, because there is like a supernatural element, if they were, I mean, I know supernatural isn't that grounded, like it's supernatural for a reason, but I think that there's different ways you can go with supernatural elements. But like, it was a really weird way that it went, I think, personally. But like, I don't know, it's my opinions could be wrong. I think it is time for me to end this video because I've been filming for a little while and I need to get back to revision. If you enjoyed this video, then you're more than welcome to subscribe to me to watch some more of my videos. Give this video a like if you would like to, and you can also go and watch some of my old videos if you really want to. I will see you in my next video.